And I had a nurse nurses at Walter Reed Hospital who would actually breathe in my nostrils to make me move, to get me moving.
Ah, yes. That's the same thing you do with kittens when they're sleeping quietly and you want to wake them up. Blow in their nose. Rescue kittens. The nurses at Walter Reed treat the President of the United States like he's a rescue kitten. Most rescue kittens have higher IQs. Given that, probably greater foreign policy knowledge. Rescue kittens? Yeah, sure. Yeah, you bet. Well, happy Monday to you and welcome back. That was Lunch Bucket Joe. He's amazingly the President of the United States and the alleged leader of the free world, which is why the free world is sinking like the Titanic. And the open border, we've got an open border now. Democrat mayor out of El Paso, Texas, right on the border. A little bit up in arms, but he was on CNN, so he didn't want to be critical of his own party, the Democrat Party. He'd rather have a lot of people murdered in El Paso than say anything negative about the Democrat Party. We got that. Sounds a little bit like the Democrat mayor of Eagle Pass, Texas, sounded last week, but maybe a little less so because he's not a serious person. He's the mayor of El Paso. He's a Democrat. He doesn't have much to say. And also you may recall the mayor of New York City talking about how the illegal alien waves are going to destroy New York City. Destroy, that's the word that he used. Not a border city. Chicago, building tent cities for all the illegal aliens there. And I don't know, any of the shootings go up there in Chicago? I can only imagine. But we've got some of that for you because the Democrat Party and the polls, the poll numbers that the Democrats are apoplectic about, and that includes the news media, ABC fake news, NBC fake news, the Democrat Party front groups on television. So we've got a lot of that going, and plenty to get. And then, of course, the standing ovation for a Nazi, for a World War II Nazi, a Waffen SS Nazi. You think there's a 25-year-old out there that can tell you what Waffen SS is? Probably not. Because we don't teach history. We don't teach anything. In fact, in New York City, the teachers are concerned because now they've basically pot is legal everywhere you go. Marijuana, smoking pot, legal everywhere you go. And the New York Post has the story, but the New York Times doesn't because they're not a legitimate newspaper. NYC students going to school high every day as drug incidents rise, according to teachers. Great stuff. And weed and right. See, weed and right. W-R-I-T-E. It's weed, like the marijuana, and right. And that's kind of fun, too. That's the headline in the New York Post today, weed and right, because they're not teaching them anything. And then, of course, in Baltimore, what do we have? What percentage of the schools? Nobody's proficient in anything. I think 4 in 10 schools in Baltimore. Nobody's going to go to engineering school. Nobody's going to become a doctor. Nobody's going to become a scientist. Nobody's going to become an engineer. Because the Democrats are ruining everything. They're against anything good. But in New York, at least, they're slashing 75% of their NYPD counterterrorism unit because, what, me worry? And also the so many stories the Democrats give me. The Mayo Clinic, the famous Mayo Clinic, world-renowned Mayo Clinic medical facility, now says hydroxychloroquine is actually a good treatment for COVID-19. After years of saying that it wasn't effective and it's there was hydroxychloroquine and then hydroxychloroquine and the other one, they kept telling us they didn't work at all. And then later on, never mind, a quiet story comes out over the weekend. Oh, so hydroxychloroquine, we told you not to take it because, and now it turns out it's good. Pay no attention to that. Amazing stuff. Yeah. And this Nazi that they gave a standing ovation to in the Canadian Parliament with Justin Trudeau and with president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. He's a 97 or 98-year-old Nazi who was with the Waffen-SS. And not that it's necessarily related, but that reminded me that Jimmy Carter's our president, Jimmy Carter, his 99th birthday is coming up. And Rosalind is there with him. What an amazing story. Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, they were spotted Saturday, day before yesterday, at a festival in Plains, Georgia. They didn't get out of the car. They were going by. But Jimmy Carter is now 98 years old, and the First Lady, former First Lady, Rosalind Carter, is 96 years old. They're riding in the back of an armored SUV provided by the Secret Service. Yeah, it was a peanut parade. It was the Plains Peanut Festival. They have the Peanut Festival, which is fun. You know, that's great stuff. So he turns 99 in just a matter of days, Jimmy Carter. Isn't that amazing? So, you know, I mean, God bless him. He was wrong about everything and a terrible, horrible president. And he actually wasn't the nice guy that everybody makes him out to be in the news media. He was mean to his staff. He carried an empty hanging bag, suit bag, to make it look like he was a regular guy. But the suit bag was empty while other people were carrying his luggage. You know, you're not supposed to carry your luggage when you're president of the United States, but he used to carry an empty suit bag, hanging bag, to make it look like he was a regular guy. That was never true. You know, it's like Joe Biden's supposed to be a nice guy, too, until you read the reports about how he curses out everybody every day and screams at the top of his lungs and calls them every name in the book and uses every, expletive deleted that is banned by the FCC all day long. Because when you're a Democrat, you know what I'm saying. I'm telling you. All right, but before we get into all that, because, it's all Democrat Party news, isn't it? Here is, I wish the Republicans made more news. Oh, we got, hey, there's a government shutdown looming, and that's all the Republicans' fault because there are no Democrats in Washington when it comes to government shutdowns. As for me, I like a good government shutdown. I live in Washington, D.C., and I find Washington is a more pleasant place when the government is shut down. So that's now, over the weekend, I want to share this story with you because it got my attention. I think it was one of these pop-up things on my iPad. Here's a news story, pop-up news story. And it was a CNN, it still is, a CNN news story. And the headline is Shadows in the Valley. Shadows in the Valley. Nearly 8 years after a shooting at Umpqua Community College left 9 people dead, and Oregon City is still trying to heal. That's the headline and the subheadline, and they got someone named Allah, A-L-A-A, Allah Elasar, typing the story for CNN. And the dateline is Roseburg, Oregon. Driving into Roseburg feels like entering a postcard. The small city tucked in the mountains of southwestern Oregon sits inside Umpqua Valley, where magnificent peaks tower over luscious pine forests and a maze of streams and waterfalls. Very colorful writing, I've got to say. And the people of Rosenberg are equally charming. And then they go off on a thing. In 2015, Roseburg became the backdrop to a mass shooting so heinous and brutal, it shattered the community's sense of safety. The slaughter of 9 people at Umpqua Community College exposed vulnerabilities many weren't prepared to face. Now, the communal PTSD permeates this place, says Al Jenkins, who lives there. And obviously a terrible and a horrible thing. And October 1st of 2015, and October 1st is coming right up. So they decided to do an anniversary piece of sorts. And they say, the U.S. has experienced more than 3,900 mass shootings since the Umpqua tragedy, according to Gun Violence Archive, which, wants to ban the Second Amendment. And here's the thing. There was a mass shooting in Washington, D.C. at a club this weekend where 4 people were shot at a club, and that's the definition of a mass shooting, where at least 4 people are shot. 1 was murdered, and 3 were wounded at a club in Washington, D.C., and it's an everyday thing, and it's almost always urban violence, right? And it's almost never what they talk about when they say mass shootings, and they're talking about something like this. Anyway, I was reading this story over the weekend with some interest and catching up on all this on October 1st, 2015, and 9 people murdered at community college, Umpqua Community College, and a terrible, horrible thing. And I read and I read and I read, and I was thinking to myself, well, why is there, there's so little about the gunman? The shooter, a 26-year-old student, was slow and methodical, making some of the victims answer personal questions, including their religion, before executing them. A classmate who dubbed the killer the Lucky One was spared to, who was declared by the killer to be the Lucky One, was spared to witness the carnage and deliver an envelope to the police. See? And so they go on, and the 26-year-old shooter, they like to call them shooter instead of murderers or killers or whatever. But I think a shooter is, like something you get at a bar with beer. But that's me. They like the shooter. And it goes on, and they talk about the incident, and they go on, and really this thing goes on for pages and pages and pages. And I was like, well, it's kind of conspicuous the way they're not talking about the killer in any substantive way. So I went and I looked up the killer because I didn't remember. There have been a lot of Democrats murdering people since then. Let's face it, you can't commit them all to memory. And I went and I found the guy, this murderer from Umpqua College on October 1st of 2015 in Roseburg, Oregon. And it does look like a beautiful place. Now, the killer was a guy named Chris Harper Mercer. He's got a hyphenated last name, which is not entirely normal. He was 26 years old. He was a student, and he fatally shot an assistant professor, 8 students in a classroom, injured 8 others. The police showed up and to stop it because the Democrats hate the police, but normal people don't. And after being wounded by the police, the Democrat killer, Chris Harper Mercer, committed suicide by shooting himself in the head, which is, thoughtful and I think a step saver, right? And if you go on, you got he murdered 9 people and then he murdered himself. So 10 people dead, 8 people injured, and all of this. And I'm like, well, it's kind of interesting, but let's keep reading. What was his motive? His motive was Satanism. Satanism, as in worshiping Satan. All right? Satanism and revenge for perceived sexual and social rejection. He was what the Democrats like to call an incel, involuntarily celibate, okay? He's a guy from a broken home. Imagine that. His mother, African-American, his father, an English guy, a white guy, and his father left his mother before he was even born. So he was born to a single mother, African-American mother, raised by him. Oregon, he couldn't get a date, and so he felt rejected. And he worshiped Satan. And here's the thing. The Washington Post just had a sort of a passing half of a sentence on this. He asked people questions, including their religion, including their religion. But what does that mean? Well, he asked them their religion, and if they said Christian, then he killed them because he was a Satan worshiper who was there to murder Christians. And I found it interesting that CNN wrote a story that was pages and pages long if you printed it out. And they forgot to mention that. That didn't come up in their lengthy story on the subject. Witnesses said he asked students if they were Christian, telling those who replied in the affirmative that they would go to heaven as he shot them and murdered them, although one victim was agnostic and another was pagan. See, there you go. So 7 of the victims were targeted for being Christian. Some students were shot multiple times. One woman was struck several times in the stomach while trying to close the classroom door. And made the woman beg for her life before shooting her. And he's a Satan worshiper, But the Democrat-run CNN decided to leave that out. That's not something that they wanted to talk about. Why would they leave that out? Well, because the most insidious power the media has is the power to ignore, right? And your news media, what does your news media do? They just airbrush that out. Why? Well, you got to keep in mind that the Democrat Party runs after-school Satan clubs across the United States of America. The temple, or what is it? The Satanic Temple. The Satanic Temple is a Democrat organization. They have after-school Satan clubs for children after they try to convince your children that they're suffering from gender dysphoria, right? Things the news media leaves out. The most insidious power the media has is the power to ignore. I say it all the time. The Oregon mass murderer was a Satan worshiper. Expected to be rewarded in hell, he said. Democrats run after-school Satan clubs across the country in grammar schools and beyond. And, they left out that James Earl Ray, who murdered Martin Luther King, was a Democrat Party volunteer for a Democrat presidential campaign for George Wallace, and that George Wallace was a Democrat racist. All the portraits and statues taken down in the Capitol by Nancy Pelosi of racists were all Democrats. The news media left that out in pretty much every single writing of that story. They also always leave out in the media and in academia that Jefferson Davis of the Confederate States of America was the Democrat there. Abraham Lincoln was killed by a Democrat. The KKK and Jim Crow laws were all Democrat laws. Stuff they leave out, Hey, it's Chris Plant, excited to tell you about our July 2024 Listener Sea Cruise. We'll be sailing around the British Isles, visiting Scotland and Ireland. Please join us. Book by this July 31st for extra savings. Visit ChrisPlantCruise.com. All right, Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to wreck America with an open border. Even some dim-witted Democrats are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the best thing. From New York to El Paso to Eagle Pass, Texas, Democrats are starting to raise an eyebrow, but really they're, I think, fundamentally so corrupt that they won't speak up in the way that they should for our country and for humanity and civilization and the rule of law, because the Democrat Party doesn't believe in the rule of law. It's a tragic situation, but it's true. And I've got stories and audio coming up for you. And Joe Biden's terrible, awful, really bad poll numbers that has his pals in the news media plotzing. They're plotzing. It's a little Yiddish thing. They're very, very upset, the news media, because, they're pushing for the Democrat Party. Ah, yes, ivermectin. I was blanking on ivermectin. Hydroxychloroquine now gets a green light from the Mayo Clinic because, everything that was taboo before is, it's crazy out there. Ivermectin, that was the horse medicine, right, which has been used in people for decades, and pay no attention to what the news media tells you because they lie all the time. There needs to be a big conference of news media chieftains who need to recognize that they have the approval rating of child molesters, and nobody has any trust or confidence in the American news media anywhere in the world, which should be an issue if you're a legitimate journalist, but it isn't, because legitimate journalists, there are legitimate journalists. You probably don't know many of their names because they don't become famous TV stars and get paid $17 million a year like George Stephanopoulos, who is a Democrat Party apparatchik posing as a journalist all these years later. Yeah, it's funny. Two people, Jeff and Randy, texted me, ivermectin, dumb beep. Uh, so thank you for the. That's right, ivermectin.
Bro, do I have to sue CNN?
I don't know. Do you?
They're making shit up. They keep saying I'm taking horse dewormer. I literally got it from a doctor.
Joe Rogan, yeah, honestly, just amazing. Yeah, ivermectin. When will that headline come out? Soon, no doubt. Soon. All right, let's go to. We've got a great deal of crazy news because the Democrats are on the loose, aren't they? And among the crazy things that the Democrats have fed us today, Joe Biden. I do have Joe Biden's polls. And I have a whole slideshow for myself, which is not great on the radio, but I got a whole slideshow for myself on the poll numbers, the ABC Washington Post poll, which the Washington Post is calling an outlier. Their own poll, they're calling an outlier. And ABC. Well, that's true. And it's the ABC Washington Post poll. And both ABC and Washington Post say the poll is an outlier because it shows President Trump up by 9 or 10 points over Joe Biden in a 1-to-1 matchup, and they can't have that. They're going to have to burn their pollster at the stake because, All right, let's go to the border because the Democrats hate America, as Mark Levin and his new book explain so beautifully, so eloquently. As always, the great one, Mark Levin and his new book. The Democrat Party really does hate, well, they hate everything and almost everyone, unless you goose step with them. But they don't hate that Nazi that, the liberals in Canada gave a standing ovation to a World War II Nazi, 98-year-old Nazi, and standing O for him. Hey! Reminds me of Harvey Weinstein at the Oscars leading a standing ovation for Roman Polanski, who's on the lam for that drug child rape thing, like Jeffrey Epstein and all that. Now, let's go to soundbite number 10. And the border, because, we're breaking records at the southern border. Well, Joe Biden is breaking records at the southern border. The number of people crossing our border last month and the number of people crossing our border this year are breaking last year's records for the month and for the year, which were all-time records because the Democrat Party Barack Obama told us years ago that we better teach our kids to learn Spanish because the Democrat Party has plans for the United States of America. And, it means it's not going to be an English-speaking nation, and there'll be gangs and cartels and mass murders and all kinds of madness. Speaking of which, my friend Tim pointed out, I was talking about the mass murder in 2015 in Oregon, and CNN wrote an exhaustively long piece about it and forgot to mention that the killer was a Satan worshiper targeting Christians and asking him if they were Christians before he murdered them. And their very, very, very long story, they forgot to mention that. And my friend Tim pointed out that the massacre in Las Vegas, at the casinos, the country concert where 60 people were murdered, that was on October 1st also. So is there some kind of a satanic tie to October 1st, or maybe it's just a big day in the Democrat Party? Hard to say. But it's kind of peculiar. 2015, massacre of people in Oregon on October 1st. 2017, Las Vegas, 60 people murdered on October 1st. And perhaps not coincidentally, Jimmy Carter was born on October 1st. Dun, dun, dun! But he's turning 99 years old next week, Jimmy Carter. Isn't that amazing? All right, let's go to the border because the Democrats are here to destroy America. That's their plan. They've said it out loud here and there. Now, today, the news media is peddling a story. Mexico makes agreement with U.S. to deport migrants from its border cities as one mayor warns his city is at, quote, a breaking point. CNN fake news with that headline. They forgot to mention the Satan worshiping targeting Christians because that wouldn't serve the interests of the Democrat Party. NBC fake news. Humanitarian crisis grows at southern border. Oh, you guys starting to pay attention to this after months of saying there's nothing to say. Literally, I guess it's years now. It's literally years because the open border started gushing pretty much the day that Joe Biden took office. Humanitarian crisis grows at southern border as more migrants cross U.S. border. NBC fake news reports. And, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, he visited the border over the weekend, and everything is so fake. These people are such fakes. He should be impeached, along with Biden. Just, by the way, he's got to leave office. You know what I mean? I think you know what I'm talking about. And another headline, Border Patrol says they are overwhelmed by influx of migrants. They like the word migrants. That's illegal aliens literally by the millions flooding across our borders, flooding Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. And they're like, oh, how dare Texas send these people to New York and Chicago and Washington, D.C. and Martha's Vineyard. They should all go to Martha's Vineyard. They should send 1 million of them to Martha's Vineyard until the island flips over, like Hank Johnson fears. We should have a Hank Johnson experiment on Martha's Vineyard. Just crazy. But let's go to Senator Tim Scott, who is running for the presidency of the United States. And he was on with, was it Maria Bartiromo yesterday? He was on the Fox News channel. And Senator Tim Scott on the border and what the Democrats are doing to our country.
We have two fundamental challenges that we see today. The first one is a president who overpromises and underdelivers, leaving in peril the workers, whether they're union or not. And secondly, we have a president who doesn't solve the looming issues of the day, like our southern border, that's led to the deaths of 70,000 Americans because of fentanyl in the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think that's just fentanyl. That doesn't count the other fatal drug overdoses, which top out at more than 100,000, a number greater than the number of Americans that died in the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and all the post-9/11 wars combined. But pay no attention to that. Tim Scott referred to the workers. Now, I suggested last week that Governor Greg Abbott should mobilize the Texas Air National Guard, and other Republican governors should mobilize their state Air National Guard assets, move transport planes down to Texas, load the transport planes up with illegal aliens, bring them to Democrat cities and to Martha's Vineyard, and put maybe, look, Eagle Pass, Texas has had an influx of illegals just in a couple of weeks that is greater than, half the population of their town, of their city. Population of about 28,000. They have 14,000 and more illegal aliens. That's half the population of the city added with illegal aliens. Now, in order to do that to New York, to make it the equivalent in New York, you'd have to move 4.5 million illegal aliens to New York City. And I would make every effort to do that. Actually, bring 4.5 million illegals and just drop them off in Times Square. Mobilize Air National Guard assets around the country, Republican governors, bring the airplanes down there, everything from C-130s to C-17s, load them up with illegals, move them to Democrat-run sanctuary cities, and push them out the back after landing. I don't mean while you're flying over. But that's a good plan. And since Senator Tim Scott mentioned the workers, I like to call them employees, but the United Auto Workers are on strike, and it's about labor. You bring in millions of people who are looking for low-wage jobs, you're going to drive wages down. That is a gimme. That's Econ 101, Chapter 2. You bring in lots and lots and lots of non-English speaking, a lot of criminal records, cheap labor, you're going to drive labor costs down. Well, the UAW is negotiating for an increase in wages of 35% or something like that over 4 years. But my other plan, and I think it's a good one too, is for the Republican governors to load up the planes and bring them to the picket lines where the UAW is protesting. And let the auto companies see thousands and thousands of brand new arrivals and say, well, these guys want to work. Because the Democrats are doing this to the country, let's do it back to the Democrats. You know, keeping in mind, of course, that Joe Biden has directed, since becoming president, tens of billions of dollars to the unions. And now the unions are looking to Joe Biden, who's not doing anything for them. But you may recall in 2021, CNBC had the story, COVID relief bill gives $86 billion bailout to failing union pension plans. $86 billion. Now, the unions funnel money to the Democrats, and pretty much exclusively to the Democrats. And Joe Biden came in, and there was a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. That's what they called it, COVID relief. And then the unions got $86 billion because the lefty criminals managing a lot of these unions have bankrupted the pension plans by siphoning money off, by lying to the union members that are making the contributions, by being corrupt, by being filthy corrupt. And then comes $86 billion in bailout money 2 years ago from Joe Biden to the unions for their failed, mismanaged, corrupt pension plans. And the U.S. taxpayers get to bail them out. And nobody bats an eye. Nobody says anything because the Democrats are fantastically corrupt. And that includes the news media. All right? So you got the open border thing. It's true. Senator Tim Scott brings up the workers, the employees, wages, the UAW on strike right now. And Joe Biden is flooding the country with millions and millions and millions of low-wage workers who will do the job for a fraction of the money. And this is the Democrats' plan for making everything better. They're going to make it better. That and teach your kid to speak Spanish, because the Democrats have a plan for the United States of America, and their plan is that it won't be the United States of America for long. Now, I mean, let me say, because I believe it's great that the United States of America, the most generous country in the world and in the history of the world, I think it's great that we take in 1 million legal aliens a year and welcome these people and invite these people from all over the world to come to the United States to join our great experiment and to become Americans. I think that's the greatest thing. It really is one of the things that makes us greater than any other country, and no other country takes in 1 million migrants a year. Although you see in Sweden, they've taken in some migrants, and now gangs are killing people all over the place because Sweden, which had one of the lowest homicide rates in the history of the world, invited a bunch of people in from Syria and Central Asia, like Afghanistan, and Turkey. And now there are gangs and mass shootings all over Sweden, of all places, because they have liberals there too. In fact, the lefty party was voted out of office last year, and a center-right party was voted in Sweden, because the left is here to destroy the world. And here in the United States, that's the Democrat Party. You know, Joe Biden's plan to introduce the digital dollar in the United States of America is already nefariously underway, and it's very important to understand the potential consequences of this scheme, because contrary to what they're saying in public, this is not in your best interest or mine. And time is of the essence, so getting smart now is a very good idea. You can help protect your savings from the risks of Joe Biden's digital dollar scheme by diversifying with IRAs in gold and silver. You get started by calling the experts at American Alternative Assets today at 888-4-GOLD-20. That's 888-446-5320. They'll give you all the guidance you need on safeguarding your retirement savings, making it safe. Say no to Joe Biden's digital dollar scheme. Call 888-4-GOLD-20. Individual results may vary. There is no guarantee that past performance of gold and silver will be indicative of future results. Seek your own legal, tax, investment, and financial advice before opening an account. take the money and run. Duh. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the open border Democrat Party, the carjacking Democrat Party, the mass shooting Democrat Party, the party of crime. I know you'll vote accordingly. Yeah, mass shooting in D.C. over the weekend. Yes, sir. All right, well, let's go to the telephones. Let's go. I see that the guy just called. Let's go to Ian, calling from Washington, D.C. Ian, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Hey, Chris, I'm a huge fan. I just thought, because you mentioned all these terrible events that have happened on October 1st, the mass shooting in Oregon and in Las Vegas, and also Jimmy Carter's birthday. And another horrible thing that happened on October 1st, 1949, was the founding of the so-called People's Republic of China.
Wow. I could not have told you that. That's their 4th of July, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. It's an anti-4th of July. And, Jimmy Carter has actually been a huge friend of the Chinese communists for many decades. And he normalized relations with China. And his Carter Center has been involved in promoting engagement, quote unquote, with China for, the last 40 years. So.
Well, and of course, Joe Biden's family has taken in millions of dollars from the communist Chinese, and now they are good friends of the Biden White House and the United States of America as long as Joe Biden's in the White House.
Exactly. Yeah. So they all seem to get along pretty well together.
That is, I could not have told you that October 1st was the Maoist revolution in China. And then, Ian, they got to work lickety-split, murdering people by the tens of millions, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And that's not really taught in American schools. I mean, if you really look at their behavior, it's actually been quite genocidal and, tens of millions.
Yeah, quite genocidal. At a bare minimum, 50 million of their own people murdered by the communists. 75 million people is the high end. I was talking to a liberal about this a couple of years ago, Ian, and he said, they got a lot of raw material, because that's the way the left views the world.